We're now with the district attorney, and Tori, if you could introduce yourself and your colleagues and then make whatever presentation you like.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tori Johnson, district attorney. To my right is Michael Brook, who's been my longtime director of finance and administration. And to my left, Teresa Sharon, who's the director of our victim witness services group. I have just a few comments of one sort or another. One, certainly I would echo a lot of what Dawn said. Of course, what she was speaking about was particularly relevant to the public defender and her office and how the support she gets from Metro as well as from the state. But I would echo the fact that the state has not, for either the prosecution or the defense side of things, stepped up and typically paid and supported the offices in the way they should, particularly here in Davidson County. So I think it's not only for the public defenders seeing that, but the district attorney's office has seen the same thing. Metro has certainly been, over the years, very, very generous in supporting what is essentially a state function. However, I think Metro realized that if they didn't support it and if they didn't fund it, the state resources that we had would be totally inadequate. We have long been interested in an objective method to really for the courts, the prosecutors, and the public defenders to be able to know what their staffing needs are. The first attempt was the 1998 weighted caseload study. There were two principal flaws with that study. Number one, it had three separate entities as consultants who were doing the studies. One for the judges, one for the prosecutors, one for the public defenders. The other flaw that it had was that there was no reliable general sessions data. And as all of you know, general sessions is where the numbers are. That's where now those aren't always cases that require the most time, but in sheer number and sheer volume, that's where your numbers are. As Dawn said, there is a movement afoot to try to get the general sessions clerks across the state. That is not one of the problems we have here, but it certainly is across the state, to report cases and to report them in a uniform way, which would allow for an updated weighted caseload study. That also may be part, it may be part of the judicial redistricting plan that is also sort of wending its way through the legislature. So that may, and the hope would be that in a year or so we might actually have some numbers that you could really compare from district to district, what the adequate numbers should be for staffing. Of course, in our situation, we represent 100% of all the people that are in the criminal court. I mean, in other words, every case we represent, and that doesn't take into account the cases that never see the light of day, the investigations or the inquiries that we spend a considerable amount of time on that don't result in criminal cases. So I would just simply make those general comments. We don't have any indication of, the district attorneys do have a bill in the legislature. It is not in the governor's budget, but in the legislature for an increased staffing. As I'm sitting here today, I have absolutely no idea as to what the chances of that bill passing or being funded to any level whatsoever. I would also call your attention real briefly to the fact that there was some press yesterday. We had put out a press release about the fact that we have added 2 new domestic violence attorneys to our general sessions level. They've been trained. They are now functioning full time as additional. So we now have 4 people in the general sessions domestic violence unit. We already have had, we had other lawyers that we've used, so we now have an 11-person group or team together, 6 attorneys and 5 victim witness coordinaters. Of course, in the meantime, so we're very grateful and thankful for that.
I saw the press release, and thank you for doing that. It's a good.
Well, I think
thing.
it'll make there's no question it'll make a difference. And of course, we know that that you've got your domestic violence assessment that is still in the process. It's still in the works. We wait to see what that will produce and what we can do in response to that. I also noted that the trial courts put out a press release too about their caseload study, that they're doing a caseload study, and we've been part of this. We were asked in several weeks ago to sit down because they realize that it looks as though the trial courts will lose the workers' compensation cases, which will take a number of cases, several thousand cases, away from the circuit judges. So they met with myself and with Dawn and others in the system to say, well, if we have a judge, whether it's an individual judge or it frees up time from several judges, what were things we could do on the criminal side to help out? Because it's my understanding that Davidson County is at least a judge, a little bit more than one judge light on the criminal side of things. Now, we've had some meetings about that. We've discussed it. We've looked at several different ways of going about it. Our office, it might be easier for our office than anybody else in the system. I can't speak for the clerks and the public defenders and so forth. But I've told the judges that we could easily use our DUI or vehicular crime unit, which is a group of 4 lawyers that is something that we could move to any court. I mean, and it wouldn't we wouldn't have some of the same security issues that you'd have in other things. That's where it gets complicated, and that's what the judges are, I think, having to weigh is how do we, if we have extrajudicial resources, how can we use them and use them effectively? And so we've talked about DUIs. Don't know where that's going to go at this point. Of course, again, we have this judicial redistricting. We know that we have some feeling that in 2014 there may be some reordering of judicial resources, and we don't know how that's going to take place. But of course, if they create an additional court, criminal court, that has additional costs, which the state is supposed to pick up, but hasn't always been that way for both public defender and for prosecution. So we'll see how that goes. But there is some issue here locally as we're trying to figure out how the local judges, the circuit judges, can help out, say, in the criminal arena. I think the handout is we'll walk through that real quickly. The first page you've seen before, which is really the breakout of both the state and the metro shares in the budget. I will say I was glad to hear that Rich said that for Dawn that she'd be able to keep the money that she gets from the state. Assuming she gets money from the state, that she'd be able to make some use of that.
My liberal finance director.
Well, I just say that wasn't the feeling of his predecessor when we were in a similar situation. It was very painfully aware of that. So
I may not be real smart, but I figured I kind of knew the handwriting on the wall on that one. So I thought I'd get on the front end of that rather than the back end.
I just saw that in Dawn's situation, timing is everything.
Exactly right.
Hopefully that works out.
Anyway, maybe you think now that I'm a little smarter than you thought I was before.
Yeah, exactly. I was impressed. Yeah. So we talk a little bit about the total, the total budget. The rest is really more an illustration of kind of total caseload and so forth. I would call your attention to one that I've included this year that is something that actually the clerk's office originally had the Criminal Justice Planning Unit do, which is the number of really docketed cases and defendants in a year. This is another way of looking at caseload, and it really shows that what it does is to say it counts essentially every time a case is in court. So you're not counting the case one time you're counting it really by court event. So if the case is in there, if the case has its first setting and then it's continued once or twice or 3 times before it is disposed of, it's counted each time. And the reason that's important is that is another way of looking at what the lawyers actually have to do, or really all the staff have to do. That case, if it's in the court and on a docket 3 times, it really has to be touched 3 times. And it is another way of looking at how the resources in our office and for that matter in the public defender's office or the clerk are used, in the sense that the cases are coming, and each time somebody's got to familiarize themselves with it and go forward. It's just another way of looking at caseloads. I mean, caseload numbers are ones that you can slice it and dice it a lot of different ways. I'm confident. I would echo Dawn in this point too. I'm confident that, and I'm sure it's true for her office as it's true for mine, I think we probably have the highest caseload per capita of any in the state. Now, and that was certainly true 4 or 5 years ago when we had some numbers we could compare, and I don't think that's changed at all. Numbers in juvenile court, our fraud unit. Again, the fraud unit is one that is kind of a flies under the radar some, but there are a surprising number of cases that of rather large thefts, usually of the embezzlement type from businesses. But what I think we've seen is ones that are now in the $50, $100, $250, $1,000 and more, much more frequently than we have in I'd say that's been a trend over the last, say, 10 years of seeing some substantial theft cases. There's no question that that's a seemingly a growth industry. Lastly, the DA's intake, that's the warrant screening process that we instituted years ago, in 1998. You can see the graph on the bottom, how those cases have gone down dramatically, and as the mayor will remember, those are the cases that for a long time were being issued. They'd get in General Sessions Court, they had very little screening, and they were a huge drain on the offices, on both defense and prosecution and judicial resources. We've been, I think, very successful in getting the ones that don't have a lot of merit out of the system. I think the word's out on the street now that it's just not something that you can routinely do, which is to go down and get a warrant on somebody you're mad at. We haven't, I can't say we've eliminated it, but we've certainly made it a lot more difficult. The next page is really just the budgetary breakdown, the target, the 2% cut, et cetera. I think as far as all the cut, as in the past, basically our budget is highly concentrated in personnel, and so it's typically and typically the lawyers are going to be more highly paid. So if you're really looking for cuts, you're going to probably cut lawyers only because you can get to those cuts with maybe 2 lawyers as opposed to 3 support staff. And I think you'll see, and that's significant, because I think what you're not going to find probably a prosecutor or a public defender that's going to say that they have all the resources that they need and really don't know what to do with them. But and I would certainly fall into that category too. But I would say that we're at the point now where we feel where we have felt the strain has been on the support area. It's the lawyers, my lawyers, I think, work very, very hard and do an exceptional job. But it is where we can use help, and what we ask for later and what we've been talking about is really in the back office work, in the investigative and administrative piece of the office that would be the biggest help. So if you turn over, the last is the last page is kind of the budget request for this year. I think that as I think we covered in some detail last year, and I believe are on the way to resolving, is we have had to keep positions open over the years in order to fund the salaries of our Metro paid assistants to keep them in line with the state. And now what that's done, of course, is in effect cut I think it's 8 full-time and 4 part-time sort of positions in order to do that. I think that we are on the process and to finally resolve that to where now our Metro paid assistants will be going forward in next fiscal year, they would be paid in line with the state. The only thing that is, and I understand that we've asked to try to get 4 positions that we froze some time ago to back to life, which are support positions, 2 investigators and two secretarial positions. And I understand there's a supplemental budget request to do that that's been filed. So that's wonderful news for us. So that's really what we're looking at from a personnel. The others we can reduce. We can take away our head count. We're not asking to recreate the 12 positions, really the 8 full-time positions. If we can reinflate 4 of these positions that are support staff people, it will put us in good shape. Again, could we use other people? Absolutely, but I think right now our most pressing need is because we see that as being important in simply the processing of cases and moving cases through the system, and that's a lot of what we do. We have some others. We have a rent increase in there. I think there's some talk and discussions about that as well as we're sitting here.
Hopefully we can take care of that, yeah.
Witness transportation is one, that's kind of more like a revolving fund in the sense that is money that we have to front, basically, to bring witnesses in. And when I was an assistant, you hardly ever brought a witness in from out of town. That was a big event. Now, as Teresa can tell you, we're bringing people in from Mexico, Germany, Japan, and not to mention California or Minnesota or wherever. And it has become a very expensive proposition. What happens is eventually all that money comes back, but it's a timing issue. In other words, we have to put the money up front to bring in a witness from someplace. We'll pay all of that. It'll come out of our travel budget. Eventually, the city and that budget will be reimbursed or replenished, but it could be 2 years before that happens. And so what this request is really doing is just asking, in essence, it's like headroom. It's just to put more money in there because that's about what our costs have actually been in the last year or so, is about $40,000. Bringing out, again, it's paid for by the state, but it's initially funded out of our pocket as we bring people in, and as I say, we've seen an increase in not only the number of people coming, but even from the distances that they come. Dawn's already talked about her training budget. I would just simply echo that. We didn't compare notes on this, but I just say the same thing. Training for us is, it's been particularly problematic because the federal government eliminated the National Advocacy Center, which did provide training in South Carolina for free for state prosecutors. That's been eliminated, and we now have, we really don't have a inexpensive way to train our lawyers, and we're casting about trying to figure out what to do about that. So that's I think my presentation, and I'll stop talking.
Well, clear to me. Any questions? Or?
So, yeah, we did, I forget how much was in the supplemental budget for you? You
The
might-
supplement is
Yeah.
it's about 45 plus
Yeah.
benefits, I think, on top of that.
On top of that,
For those
yeah.
four
For those
positions.
positions, right.
April 1 through June.
Through June,
30,
and then the
right.
238 number funds that for the full year, is that correct?
Right.
And that's the pressing
That's the-
need.
right.
If
Correct.
That's the other side of the coin. yeah.
would not turn down anything else, but
No,
that's the
no,
pressing.
no, no,
But that's the
that-
pressing need, okay, I just want to make sure I.
That's sort of linked, so if one goes,
Yeah.
the other, I mean, we don't need the supplemental without the funding next year. I don't want to terminate 3 people as soon as we
Yeah, as soon as you
hire them.
Come on, yeah.
Don't want to do that. Right.
Okay.
That's it.
Just wanted to make sure that, this has been an ongoing saga.
Ongoing saga.
It's
But there appears to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
a good thing.
No questions.
And,
Well, thank you, and
Thank you.
and thanks for the domestic violence.
well, thank you. No,
Yeah,
we're-
thank you.
it took some time, but I think it's going to pay off in the long run.
Very good.
Good, thanks. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's always good to have